All right, welcome back, Bio 153 students. And today we're going to look at Chapter 22, which goes over the lymphatic system. Now, in your textbook, it kind of combines the lymphatic system with the immune system, but I decided to go ahead and break it down into two different lecture series. So today, it's all about understanding the lymphatic system, which in comparison to what we looked at with the cardiovascular system, it's definitely a lot more simplistic. So here we go. All right, so looking at some of the important functions of this lymphatic system. One is the fact that the lymphatic system is going to be returning excess interstitial fluid, leaky proteins, along with absorbed fat, believe it or not, ultimately to the venous system. So back to the veins, per se. And ultimately, this fluid that's moving through in the lymphatic system is defined as lymph, which is a very clear type of fluid for the most part. The lymphatic system also plays a very important role with the immune system response. So very critical to go after foreign items that might be found. And lymphoid organs will assist with this process in tissues as well, as we'll see. All right, so first it's really important to have a good idea of the direction of the lymph through the lymphatic system. And the lymphatic system are going to be these structures indicated in the green here. These structures are part of the lymphatic system. So, we take a look at the direction. So, lymph will be in lymphatic capillaries. And this is typically the starting point. And that's because you have some fluid that was actually in your blood capillaries. You have some fluid that leaves those blood capillaries, and some of that fluid actually enters into the lymphatic capillaries. So here in this diagram then, blood capillaries are going to be, of course, the red here, showing oxygen-rich blood. And then, of course, you have the movement of the oxygen into the tissues, CO2 buildup, of course, in the tissues, going back into the oxygen-poor blood vessels here. And again, you do have some movement of fluid that takes place. If you remember back in the last chapter, we looked at calculating the net filtration pressure of the capillary, and we talked about the idea that some of that water leaves, and with that, some of that water material will actually go into the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system here then is going to be these green. So these green structures here represent the lymphatic capillaries. Okay? So that gives you an idea here. So again, blood capillaries, again, the red here, the blue here. Lymphatic capillaries are these green structures that ultimately are transporting that lymph. So, the lymph travels through the lymphatic capillaries, and then eventually the lymph will enter into what are known as lymphatic collecting vessels. From there, the lymph will then enter into lymphatic trunks, and these are draining large areas of the body. From there, the lymph will then make its way to lymphatic ducts, and these are draining real large areas. There's two major duct systems. And then eventually the lymph will empty into the venous system or venous circulation. So venous system up here, really referring to going into oxygen-poor blood, really into veins. And we'll look at those two major ones shortly here. It's also important to have an idea of if you have a comparison between lymphatic capillaries and blood capillaries, and that's what this slide is really focusing in on here. Again, the blood capillaries are represented right here, oxygen-rich blood, and then you have the gas exchange occurring here, and then we have the oxygen-poor blood going out here. And again, some of that fluid will leave the blood capillaries and will enter into lymphatic capillaries in the green. And then that lymph, again, is traveling through these lymphatic capillaries. So, doing a comparison, lymphatic capillaries are very permeable because they contain endothelial cells. Remember that blood capillaries also have endothelial cells, and they're very, very thin. So it's very easy for items then, of course, to go ahead and go into a lymphatic capillary. If that would be cellular debris or proteins or different pathogens, might easily be able to be transferred there. Bacteria, viruses, etc. And unfortunately, even cancer cells. And they also contain valves. So certain veins likewise had valves that we talked about, and we looked at blood circulation as a whole. And there's valves associated here with the lymphatic system too, one-way mini valves. And they're important for regulating lymph movement. Very key for preventing collapse of the capillaries as a whole. Here we have a picture of an overall lymphatic capillary. Again, structurally it's going to be green. It's made up of endothelial cells again. So those are very, very thin. So right here, endothelial cells. And they also contain valves. So a flap-like mini valve, which will open and close based off of differences in pressure. So here is that mini valve right here. We find lymphatic capillaries throughout the body, but there are certain areas where they are going to be absent. So lymphatic capillaries are absent from bones, teeth, bone marrow, and the central nervous system. Of course, referring to the brain and the spinal cord. And lymph movement, again, is solely based off of fluid pressure differences that take place between interstitial space and the actual lymphatic capillary. And so we'll take a look at that and how these valves open and close here next. But this gives you an idea again of what does that lymphatic capillary look like. And maybe it looks like a cucumber, maybe it looks like a pickle or whatever, but this is the lymphatic capillary here. All right, there's not a whole lot of physiology when we look at the lymphatic system. The big thing here ultimately is the opening and closing of these valves, these mini valves. And that's ultimately triggered by differences in fluid pressure. So, first we'll take a look at when fluid pressure in the interstitial space, this is the space between tissue cells. So if you're wondering where is he talking about? What are we looking at here, Chris? So interstitial space, all this area out here around the tissue cells. When that fluid pressure in interstitial space is greater than the pressure actually in the lymphatic capillary, the valves open. So when pressure is real strong, it's going to lead to these mini valve flaps opening like this picture illustrates. You have greater pressure that's found out here in interstitial space in comparison to in the interior of your lymphatic capillary. So lymph is going to go ahead, the valves open, and that allows for that fluid to go in here. So now we have the lymph, and the lymph then travels through the lymphatic capillary. So, pretty interesting here. So again, fluid pressure, interstitial space. If it's greater than the pressure in the lymphatic capillary, those mini valve flaps open up. that allows for the fluid to enter into that lymphatic capillary. But eventually there might be a point where you get enough fluid inside the lymphatic capillary that you might get to a point where the fluid pressure ends up being greater inside the lymphatic capillary. So if the pressure is greater eventually inside the lymphatic capillary, so lymphatic capillary right here, in comparison to outside in interstitial space, that's going to lead to the mini valve flaps then closing. So then they go ahead and they close up. So you're not going to have all this fluid coming in here anymore. It leads to these valves actually closing up. So all these valves are closing now. All closing up here. That's what's happening here. Okay, so then the valves go ahead and close. So that's about it when it comes to physiology in this chapter. The next thing we're going to take a look at are looking at the lymph nodes. So lymph nodes are found throughout the body. They are considered to be the principal lymphoid organs of the body. So there are several regional areas where we find lymph nodes. So you have lymph nodes located in the neck area. These are called the cervical nodes. So you can kind of see that here in this diagram. So in this vicinity here. You also have lymph nodes in the armpit area, so the axillary nodes. So this area right here, right? Or right here. And likewise up here, of course, would be the cervical nodes on the next side here, right and left, of course. You also have lymph nodes in your groin area. So here we have what's known as the inguinal nodes. So lymph nodes found there. So a lot of them found here. And then the picture here doesn't illustrate this, but you also have lymph nodes in the pelvic vicinity and also the lumbar area as well. Those are major areas where lymph nodes are found. And definitely important to be aware of that. Down here, we look at the comparison of lymphatic collecting vessels versus veins. Differences here include thinner tunic wall areas and more internal valves. But the big thing to get off of this picture is the understanding of the various locations where we find these lymph nodes. Now, eventually, the lymph will travel into what are known as lymphatic trunks. And these are formed by collecting ducts. They drain large areas of the body. There is a total of 9 lymphatic trunks that ultimately are collecting this lymph and are going to eventually transport it to the lymphatic ducts. So in the diagram up here, you'll find that a lot of these trunks have a right and a left to them. So for example, we have the right jugular trunk, but we also have the left jugular trunk. And these are going to be near the jugular veins. So in very close proximity to the internal jugular veins. We also have the right subclavian trunk and the left subclavian trunk. So those are going to be very close to the subclavian veins. You also have a right bronchial mediastinal trunk and also a left bronchial mediastinal trunk up in the upper chest vicinity. Going farther down the body, you have a right lumbar trunk and a left lumbar trunk. So down near the lower back. And finally, you also have what's known as an intestinal trunk located near the intestine. So referring to the colon. So those are the 9 lymphatic trunks So important to be aware of those and to know those. All right, now we take a look at the lymphatic ducts. There are two major ducts draining significant parts of the body, of the lymph. So we have the right lymphatic duct, and that's going to drain the right upper arm, right side of the head, and the thorax. So it's the area you see here that's kind of in the green here. So this area all right here. And I could also trace it for you too. So it's going to be this area right here that's drained by the right lymphatic duct. We now take a look at the thoracic duct. So we've already looked at the right lymphatic duct. We take a look at the thoracic duct. And this drains the rest of the body. The right lymphatic duct drains about 1/3 of the body, while the thoracic duct is draining more like 2/3 of the body. And this thoracic duct is arising from what's known as the overall cystine chyli. And that's a very large sac that typically is containing the actual fatty lymph, because we mentioned that fat can go through the lymphatic system too. So the cystine chyli. Eventually, the ducts will eventually get the lymph emptied into venous circulation. The two major veins where the lymph will enter into is the internal jugular veins and the subclavian veins. So, of course, then we have the right and left internal jugular veins and the right and left subclavian. So we can kind of get an idea here. Internal jugular veins here, and subclavian will be kind of more over here. Here's internal jugular, subclavian, and subclavian. Now those are important because when we look at the lymphatic system, we also have to consider the aggressive nature of cancer. So there's different stages of cancer, and if somebody's cancer is more on the aggressive side, they may have to start taking chemotherapy. So when the pharmacist preps the chemotherapy drugs and then delivers them to the nurse, then it's a matter of going ahead and preparing for the chemotherapy to go on the patient. So typically, there's a little bit of a surgery that takes place to go ahead and make kind of what's going to be that chemo shunt. And that's typically, that overall shunt will be put into either the internal jugular vein or subclavian, whatever is more accessible for the patient. And then the chemotherapy drug will be placed then into one of those veins, and that's important because eventually then that can help to flush out, hopefully, the cancer cells that might be in the lymph to hopefully put them in check, and hopefully the med will go after and try to destroy them if need be. We look at diseases from time to time, and one that's very appropriate with the lymphatic system is looking at lymphedema. Edema, of course, referring to fluid. Lymphedema here referring to lots of fluid buildup in the lymphatic system. And this is looking at an abnormal increase in the amount of the fluid. And this can lead to very severe localized swelling. So some of the causes of lymphedema, sometimes it can be tumors. That can be the result of lymph buildup. Sometimes you have some lymph buildup from the removal of lymph nodes during cancer surgery. This is a preventative measure so the cancer doesn't spread throughout the body from one localized organ. So that could be the case if someone has breast cancer and maybe the breasts are removed. And sometimes some lymph nodes may be removed too as a precaution. A very severe way that someone has lymphedema is what's known as elephantiasis. elephantiasis. And for the most part, the majority of patients get this are living more in tropical regions where there's lots of mosquitoes. Because mosquitoes are considered to be vectors. So when you get stung by a mosquito, ultimately, the mosquito might be a vector, so it's possibly carrying the larvae of maybe parasitic roundworms. And then you get parasitic roundworms, and I have this listed here. You have the larvae in, and they start to grow. And then they reproduce, and then more larvae. And then they're literally in your lymphatic system. And they could be blocking certain areas of the lymphatic system, which can lead to significant fluid buildup. That's the case here with this individual here, where look at the severe swelling of the leg here. So typically legs, ankles, feet can swell significantly, thighs, because of elephantiasis. And for men, it's even worse. For men, believe it or not, their scrotum can become significantly swelled. Some scrotums can be really, really big and hang a very long distance out of the individual's shorts or whatever. So it's a very, very difficult situation. And you can see a lot of these people in third world countries, in city centers of countries, in India, or maybe Vietnam, or Brazil, or places like that along the equator. So now we're going to take a look at a couple videos that really show this firsthand. So I hope you enjoy them. They are a little graphic, but hey, you're going into the medical field, right?
My results should be in any time now, but I need to stay and investigate one final thing: elephantiasis. Most people think of this man, Joseph Merrick, better known as the Elephant Man, when they think of elephantiasis. But his condition was symptomatic of a genetic disorder, not a disease he caught. Elephantiasis is commonly the result of lymphatic filariasis, a massive invasion of a microscopic parasitic worm. It's transmitted by mosquitoes and can cause horrifying and debilitating deformities. Perhaps this is the one that I find the most frightening. Because once you've got elephantiasis, it's a life sentence. But I've discovered a clinic, the only one in Brazil, that may have found a remedy. I'm traveling nearly 2,000 miles southeast to São José do Rio Preto. I've been invited to the clinic to meet Raimundo, a current patient.
Sou Jeremy. Posso sentar? A primeira vez que fui em Manaus já faz mais ou menos 15 anos. Mas depois eu já retornei.
Right, this dates back quite a few years, 15 years or so.
E aí, nessa dança de jogos escolares,
Raimundo was working as a therapeutic masseur. He was mainly treating football players. There was a tournament in Manaus, but in between the games, there was some time off. Raimundo remembers that he went to a local creek in the early evening with some of his fellow players to relax and cool down. He remembers being bitten by mosquitoes. And he thinks it was this ordinary event that ended up changing the course of his life forever. Because what happened to him is unbelievably horrific. He recalls being bitten by lots of mosquitoes, but like most places in the Amazon, their presence is common, and being bitten is just a way of life. But on that day, there were more mosquitoes than usual, and an infected one bit Raimundo, releasing parasitic worm larvae into his bloodstream, where they travelled into his lymph vessels, a vital part of the body's circulatory system.
não, eu passei 2 dias, inclusive.
And he says it was literally a matter of days
A perna começou a inchar.
that he noticed something with his left leg. It started swelling. As well as the swelling, he said it was also
Muito.
a sensation of heat. He said it was almost like it was it was burning.
Depois de uns 10 anos pra cá,
After about 10 years,
ficou insuportável, caso insuportável.
it was actually almost unbearable.
Aí que veio a complicação,
The skin used to fall away,
deu até em bicho.
and he actually got sort of infestations of other parasites in the skin, and particularly in his foot. So it sounded
Coisa horrível.
pretty horrible. Over time, the adult worms clogged up the lymph vessels in his leg. Fluid built up, causing gigantic and horrifying swellings. With powerful drugs, Raimundo was eventually freed of the parasite, but irreversible damage had already been done.
Inchando mais, e doendo.
He said there's no way that this can be stopped, there's no way that I can do anything about it. He said he got just really, really depressed, he prayed a lot,
Até pra viver.
almost lost the will to live, and this went on for 20 years.
So pretty exciting stuff there. So it gives you an idea how a lot of people struggle with different types of diseases in third world countries. We're now going to look at, well, what type of treatment can be done for this gentleman? And we'll take a look at the next video that looks at that.
It's only now, to be precise 19 days ago, that Raimundo arrived here at Dr. Godoy's clinic. For the first time, he's receiving proper treatment. It's having a profound and noticeable effect. This disease is difficult for some people to look at, but the tough part for me is knowing that Raimundo has to live with it every day. No, I mean, this is very hard to believe, but this is actually a considerable improvement on when Raimundo first came in here. When he first came, Dr. Godoy couldn't touch his hands. He couldn't get his arms all the way around the leg. There was a gap of about a foot, something like that. So already a dramatic improvement. And the aim is to get this leg equal to the other one. In order to achieve that, Dr. Godoy has designed a simple and effective treatment.
Fica fácil. Segura a peça para fazer uma bandagem.
All of this extra bulk, most of it is liquid. The skin obviously stretches to accommodate that. So in fact it is possible to get rid of this quite quickly. First, the leg is wrapped in bandages. Then it's laced into this, a special type of corset. The compression device gently squeezes the leg, forcing the lymph fluid out as the corset is tightened up throughout the day. The leg is also raised slightly, the gravity helps that process. And then every hour or so he's going to go and relieve himself, because what's happening to that fluid? The kidneys are filtering it, they're processing it, it's being eliminated from the body. Dr. Godoy's simple methods have provided a true revolution in the treatment of elephantiasis. His results with past patients have been nothing short of miraculous. The hope now is that Raimundo will be his next success. I'm just trying to put myself in Raimundo's position, and the fact is I actually can't. The odds were just ridiculous. One mosquito biting him. And I think if that was me, I don't think I would have survived mentally, spiritually, to arrive at the point that he has eventually arrived at now, where finally, after all this time, there is hope.
So, quite graphic when we look at elephantiasis. And who knows, maybe one of you guys will be a traveling nurse and physician and help people like this that are struggling with these types of diseases in third world tropical countries. So, moving on, we now look at cancer. So, That's a very big thing. Many of you will possibly be working maybe on an oncology unit. So maybe you may be a nurse that works on the cancer unit, perhaps. And the number one type of cancer that we find in women is breast cancer. So that's what we're looking at here. So breast cancer. So that's considered to be the number one type of cancer in North America. Number one when it comes to women. But of course, important to be aware of that this also, breast cancer can be in men too. So for men, the number one cancer in men, maybe you know this already, in men, number one cancer type is prostate. So prostate cancer. That's the number one type of cancer in men is prostate cancer. And for women, it's breast cancer. The number one cancer that kills in North America, you're probably thinking, I know it. Yep, it's going to be lung cancer. That's the number one cancer that causes death in North America. Number one is lung cancer. So we take a look here. There's different stages of cancer, and here we can see the tumor that's in the breast. And if it's malignant, this cancer will get larger and larger and larger and keep growing. And when it's growing and multiplying, this is known as metastasizing. And eventually the cancer might get really, really, really big in the breast. And then maybe it makes its way into the lymphatic system. And then that becomes a very serious situation, because now not only is the cancer in the breast, but maybe now the cancer is in the brain or the liver or the bones. So it becomes a very serious situation now for this person. They're probably going to have to be getting aggressive chemotherapy with radiation. Maybe they've already had their breast removed. So they've already had a mastectomy occurring here to remove the breast. And now it's a matter, maybe they're trying other treatments. So maybe they're getting some immunotherapy as well. Now, some people are lucky. There's definitely some abnormal growth in the breast, but it ends up not being malignant and ends up being benign, thankfully. So that's the case with some people. So there's many reasons for somebody getting breast cancer. A big one, of course, is your genetics. So genetics is really key. If it runs in your family, more likely than not, you're probably going to get it. So if that's the case, it's important to get mammograms very early in your life. So waiting until you're in your 50s, you may want to consider getting mammograms when you're in your 20s. So that's a big thing, is your genetics. Big risk factors also for getting breast cancer is alcoholism, sedentary lifestyle are very big. Smoking. So those are really big as well. So a well-balanced diet with exercise, no smoking, no alcohol, really decreases your chances of getting breast cancer. How is the lymph transported through the lymphatic system? That's what we're going to take a look at here next. So lymph is transported through the lymphatic system. There's really only two major ways. Lymph is propelled through the lymphatic system through either, number one, pulsations of nearby arteries, so rhythmic throbbing occurring, and number two, contractions of smooth muscle in the walls of the lymphatic trunks and thoracic duct. And that's it. The overall lymph movement is very, very, very slow. About 3 liters of lymph enters the bloodstream in a 24-hour time frame. So it's a very sluggish process, the movement of the lymph. Some people have this idea that the lymph node acts like the heart, and the lymph node is pumping the lymph. But that is false. These are the only 2 methods how the lymph will be propelled in the lymphatic system. We now take a look at the lymph node here. So, how does the lymph enter into a lymph node? What you're going to find are these afferent lymphatic vessels, and they're to the outside. And lymph enters into the lymph node through these afferent lymphatic vessels. Once the lymph enters inside, and maybe the lymph is in this vicinity now, the lymph is it's going to slow down. Not that it moves all that fast, but it does slow down here. And this allows for time now for filtering of the lymph to occur. So macrophages, and they develop from monocytes, are able to go ahead and destroy possible microbes that might be in the lymph fluid and cellular debris. So when we talk about microbes here, macrophages, again, they're able to go after, maybe destroy bacteria, viruses, toxins, fungi, things like that. And of course, the immune system response is key. So lymphocytes, such as T cells, are being activated potentially here and attacking against antigens, foreign materials. That could be harmful to the body. And then from here, the lymph will exit the lymph node through what are known as the efferent lymphatic vessels. So lymph exits here through the efferent lymphatic vessels. So again, how does the lymph enter into a lymph node? It's because of the afferent lymphatic vessels. They're always to the outside of the lymph node, and there's always more of them, in contrast to the efferent lymphatic vessels, where there may be only 2, and the lymph will exit from here. We're now going to take a look at lymphoid organs. And lymphoid organs are made up of reticular connective tissue, key for protecting of the body. So we're going to go through the various lymphoid organs. Very important to know these, know where they're identified, and of course, knowing their functions. So we're going to go through. We're going to look at the tonsils. We're going to look at the thymus gland, the spleen, and also looking at the Peyer's patches, which are found in the small intestine, and likewise Peyer's patches found in the appendix. So we'll now go ahead and we'll take a look at each. So the first lymphoid organ we're going to look at in here today is the spleen. This is by far the largest lymphoid organ. The spleen has a lot of different functions. It plays a role in lymphocyte purification. It also plays a role in immune surveillance and response. It plays a big role with filtering of blood, of maybe aged or defective cells. Likewise, platelets. Of course, the aged cells we've mentioned before is erythrocytes, red blood cells, and can remove cellular debris. If we go ahead and look within the middle of the spleen, there are 2 types of what are known as pulp. There's white pulp and red. So first, white pulp. Typically, this is going to contain lymphocytes and involved in immune functions. Typically found along the lining of central arteries that go through the spleen. So we can see that here. So our white pulp, it would be this area right here that you see. This area, this area in the white here, okay? And then we have what's known as the red pulp. The red pulp contains macrophages. Again, they're derived from the white blood cell monocytes. So macrophages are important for disposal of worn out red blood cells and blood-borne pathogens, typically found within the splenic tissue. So red pulp, again, the red pulp is going to be found amongst the splenic tissue. So all this area here is where you'll find that red pulp. In contrast to white pulp, this white area you see internally in the spleen. Sometimes the spleen will rupture, and that can become serious because of the amount of blood that goes through it. And then you have all that internal bleeding going on. Someone can live without a spleen, though. And so if it's caught early, again, very key to have that removed. And the spleen can rupture for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it can be sports related. Maybe it's a football injury, a hockey injury, and the spleen ruptures, or playing lacrosse, or something with severe contact. Maybe it's a car accident where the spleen ruptures, or someone has a bad fall, and that the spleen ruptures then. We now take a look at the thymus. So looking at the thymus gland here next. So the thymus, the main function here, this is the location of T lymphocyte maturation. This is where the T cells actually mature and per se become an adult and then properly can function in your body. It ultimately increases in size and very active during childhood for the maturation process. So a lot of T cells are being produced here. Typically after puberty, it decreases in size. We now take a look at the tonsils, the simplest lymphoid organ. So you can see the tonsils are found in a variety of locations. So we have the pharyngeal tonsil, so that's found up near the nasal pharynx, the palatine tonsil in the oral cavity, and linguinal tonsil at the base of the tongue. Major function of tonsils is for removal of pathogens such as bacteria or viruses. Maybe it can be even cellular debris. Fungi from entering your throat, the pharynx. And a very interesting thing that tonsils contain are these tonsillar crypts. So here's a tonsillar crypt right here, okay? And these are very deep depressions and are very key for trapping pathogens here. So tonsillar crypt, key for trapping and destroying bacteria and other pathogens and particulate matter. And there's a tonsillar crypt you can see again right here. We now take a look at the Pyrus patches. So the Pyrus patches are considered to be aggregated lymphoid nodules. Their functions, they're very important when it comes to destroying bacteria that might be trying to breach the intestinal wall. So they prevent the breaching of the intestinal wall, destroying that bacteria. They also generate memory lymphocytes for long-term immunity. And the Pyrus patches, again, are found in the small intestine, typically the last region, which is known as the ileum, and also can be found along the lining of the appendix. This image shows you where the Pyrus patches are located. So here, this picture here, these are the Pyrus patches. These circular structures that you see here. So this brings us to talking about the appendix. Some people end up having their appendix removed because the appendix becomes very infected, inflamed, and it might burst. And typically a lot of bacteria and things like that are in the appendix. And if the appendix can burst, if that happens, that's very, very severe because then you have a lot of toxins that are moving through your body. So if you're having severe pain down in your abdominal area, okay, so down in that lower right area, okay, near the colon, very important to make sure to go to the hospital as soon as you can because you don't want that appendix to burst at home. So very important to make sure to get to the hospital as soon as possible and have that surgically removed. The surgery is, back in the day, of course, they used to gut you, of course, but again, usually there's just a couple little scars, so it's a lot more of a simplistic type of surgery, and then typically it will take you about a week or two to recover. So typically they don't recommend for you to lift weights or lift anything and get a lot of rest before you go back to work. But I've known plenty of people that have had the appendix removed, friends who've had it removed. So fairly common sometimes for this to take place. There's a lot of unknowns why some people have their appendix significantly inflamed and have to have it removed versus others. So a lot of unknowns there. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and review. So our first question of review here, number 1. This lymphoid organ is the largest in the body. It cleanses blood of aged and defective red blood cells and platelets, along with removing debris. So, what would be the correct answer here based off of these choices? And the correct answer, I would go with letter C, the spleen. Number 2, this lymphoid organ contains the tonsillar crypts and removes pathogens from entering into the throat, the pharynx. So what would be the correct answer here? All right, and the correct answer, I would go with choice letter D, the tonsils. Number 3 for review. Lymph empties into venous circulation via which structures? Or structure, for that matter. What would be the correct answer here? And the correct answer that I would go with would be choice letter D, both A and C. So both A and C. We'll circle that one more time here for you. Both A and C. So your internal jugular veins, right? And also the subclavian veins right there. But not the external jugular veins. Number 4 for review. Lymph enters into a lymph node via blank and exits the lymph node via blank. So, what would be the correct answer here? And the correct answer that I would go with would be choice letter C. Lymph will enter into a lymph node through the afferent lymphatic vessels. So right here and here, just like that. And of course, the lymph will exit the lymph node right here. These are the efferent lymphatic vessels. So C would be the correct answer. So, I hope that you have enjoyed our lecture today. And until next time,